Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sarah, would you like to take over?
Let me unmute myself. My name's Sarah Quinn. I'm a preservation planner with the city of Pittsburgh. And we have our consultants here tonight to talk to you all about the architectural inventory that was conducted in the Crawford-Roberts neighborhood last year. We've tried a couple times to get to see you. We finally made it today. Jesse Belfast is here, and he's going to sort of give you guys the results of the survey. Now, Jesse, do you need me to run the slides, or do you have them for yourself?
Sarah, I think I can share my screen and flip through. Let me see if I can get that to work. Okay. All right.
There we go.
Let's see. Of course. All right. So my name is Jesse Belfast. I'm an architectural historian with Michael Baker International. And I've been the project leader on the Pittsburgh Architectural Inventory since 2014 when they were initiated. And Michael Baker worked with two other firms on this effort for Crawford-Roberts. Clio Consulting was a partner, Angelique Bamberg. She's not here with us today, but she participated both in the field work for this effort, and she also wrote a historical background section of our report. And Cosmos Technologies helped us with the project mapping and inventory tables. So I will go through a kind of brief summary of the facts and then present some mapping and a few photographs and then leave some time for questions. So one of the objectives of the study was really to be a community planning tool. And we hope that this is just a starting point, not the completion of the identification of historic buildings in this community. We really want community leaders to take these results and use it as a way to open dialogue amongst yourselves and to begin to think about what's important to you and how you want to use the historic assets in your community going forward. So this study was undertaken as part of the National Park Service's Certified Local Government Program in cooperation with the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office and Pittsburgh Department of City Planning. And one of the objectives was to look back at previous planning studies, previous efforts to identify historic buildings in the neighborhood, and to get an understanding of which of those buildings survive, what's their condition. And then we wanted to go and look at what new properties could be there that would be of importance to the community, both from an architectural point of view, but also for other reasons, such as being associated with historic events or people of importance to the community. So we looked at several existing databases, including the National Register of Historic Places, what's called PA Share. This is the state's own internal database of historic properties. Pittsburgh Register, which is really the city's first community-wide effort to identify historic buildings in Pittsburgh, and that was from 1992 to 1993, so pretty old. We looked at the current designated city of Pittsburgh landmarks, and we also looked at the 1993 African American Historic Site Survey that was done throughout Allegheny County. So this was the 12th phase of the City of Pittsburgh's Architectural Inventory. The survey was conducted in July of 2024, and the report was compiled in August and September. And I wanted to mention that this effort completes our survey of Hill District neighborhoods. We surveyed the Middle Hill in October 2019 and Upper Hill in February 2021. We surveyed a total of 1,231 properties. Of those, 1,099 were newly surveyed and 132 were previously surveyed. Of those 132 that were previously surveyed, there were 22 that were demolished and not replaced, so vacant, and 15 were demolished and replaced with new buildings. There are currently no National Register or City of Pittsburgh listed historic districts in Crawford-Roberts neighborhood. However, there were 3 individually listed properties in the National Register: the Connolly Trade School, Lecce Elementary School, which is now Lecce Apartments, and the August Wilson House. There were also 2 individually designated historic structures in the neighborhood: the August Wilson House and the Tito Mancaziza House. Here are some brief summary here now of our recommendations for National Register eligibility. As I said, there were 3 individually listed things. We have 2 previously surveyed resources that the state has already determined to be individually eligible. And when we field check those, we concur that those 2 resources are still eligible. However, there was one resource which was determined not eligible by the state. That was the Hebrew Institute of Pittsburgh. And this survey, after reviewing it, recommends a reversal of that determination. We think that the Hebrew Institute should be considered for potential individual significance. So that is one resource which the community can do more research and possibly get a formal recommendation for eligibility with the state. There are 12 resources that were not previously identified in other surveys that we are recommending for the first time to be potentially eligible for the National Register. And I'm sorry, I said that backwards. 12 resources that have individual determinations by the state. That means the state has reviewed them and recommended them eligible. However, they're not listed. And there were 10 that we recommended as newly identified that we think that the community can review those and do further research at the intensive level. And those could potentially be National Register properties if the community decides to nominate them. And so in total, there are 28 properties that were identified by this effort that could be eligible for listing in the National Register. Now I'll talk a little bit about potential historic districts. Previous efforts identified the Webster Avenue Historic District as being potentially eligible for the National Register. There was nothing formally done to nominate it, but when we surveyed that neighborhood, the majority of the buildings that were within its boundaries had been demolished. And so we're recommending a reversal of that eligibility recommendation. We no longer think it meets the requirements for listing because of integrity. However, we identified 2 other places that we think meet the criteria for historic districts. One is the Roberts de Villiers Houses Historic District, and the other is the Lockhart Houses Historic District. And I'll show you some illustrations of buildings and some maps of those at the end of the presentation. In addition, we looked at potential historic streets. So we have 4 streets identified with brick and stone pavement that we think could qualify as part of a potential citywide district that comprises all of the streets with historic pavement. And there were 3 city steps that we think could be significant as part of a larger citywide district that comprises all city steps. So this map here shows all of planning sector 15, which comprises Hill District and Uptown. You can see Crawford-Roberts, which was the area we surveyed for this effort, outlined in blue. This map shows the distribution of newly surveyed and previously surveyed properties within the neighborhood. The previously surveyed ones are in red and the newly surveyed in yellow. And when we surveyed properties, and when I talk about things that could be potentially eligible for the National Register, one of the things that a property needs to have is a certain threshold of historic integrity. And so when we surveyed buildings, each one was rated for integrity, either low, medium, and high. And I'll point out that when I say historic, that was defined in this study as pre-1985. So anything prior to 1985, we photographed and rated for integrity, and we actually collected information about the materials, building styles, etc. All of that is contained in a database that both the city and the state has. And so what this map shows is our integrity ratings. So this is for anything which was pre-1985 is color coded, high, medium, or low. So high is red, medium is yellow, and low is green. One of the reasons why we make maps such as this is it helps us identify where historic districts could be. So if we have a concentration of high integrity, that clues us into an area we should take a second look at to see if it might qualify for a historic district. As you can see here, many of the buildings here that were rated for integrity were medium, and there really was not, I would say, any one area that contained a concentration of really high integrity buildings. This map shows location of post-1985, so modern properties shown in yellow and vacant parcels shown in brown. One of the reasons we make maps like this is it helps us uh, get a visual understanding of how the property has changed over time and where what we would call, from a historic perspective, the modern buildings would be intrusions to the historic integrity of the neighborhood as a whole. And as you can see here, we don't have many areas in the neighborhood that have a really high concentration of the historic buildings, which would be in this figure in white. There's quite a bit of demolition and modern infill buildings. And so this is one of the reasons we didn't recommend the whole neighborhood as qualifying as a historic district, but only two fairly small areas. And this map shows the location of the four most common building styles that we encountered. And modern movement was the most common, and that's partly because of the amount of newer buildings that have been built in the neighborhood. The second most common was colonial revival style, which is generally things from around the turn of the century. The third most common was Italianate, which is typically a last quarter of the 19th century. And the fourth was Romanesque style, which again is a late 19th century style. So this map shows the locations of the areas that we recommended as potential historic districts. The first one is the Roberts de Villiers houses, which it's two areas. It looks like two, but there's a small connection here, shown in green. The second district is a little bit smaller, the Lockhart houses down here in red. And what you see in pink here are the locations of the buildings that we called out in the survey as having potential individual significance for the National Register. And those are fairly well spread out throughout the neighborhood. I have a couple figures here that just show some statistics. These we make these types of figures to just sort of give us a visual overview of the historic development of the neighborhood. So this first figure shows the resources by decade of construction. You can see we've got from the late 19th, early 20th century, kind of a lot of buildings in that period. And then we've got a lot of things built in the 1990s, early 2000s as redevelopment happened in the neighborhood. So we really have two periods of significant development represented here. And then we have some kind of outliers of the, there's some what I would call the rare survivors you have here from the like 1860s and 70s. And then from the early 20th century, there's some infill development represented there as well. And some additional statistics which aren't shown in this bar graph here, I'll just mention by the numbers. There were 460 vacant properties, that was 37%. And there were 413 post-1985 properties, that was 33%. And domestic was the overwhelming most common function. That's 50% of those surveyed. And the types of things we surveyed, buildings were 710. Structures can be many different things. It can be the roads and steps that I mentioned, sites and objects. Sites can be things like landscape side yards, parks, basically anything that's not vacant but has a use. Objects, we have some examples of sculpture. Those are recorded as objects. So it's not just only, the houses that we're surveying. We're looking at all of the things in the streetscape in this survey. I'm not going to go through all of this. I already mentioned these most common four styles, but all of the architectural styles that we encountered were listed here in this figure, along with the corresponding number of properties that corresponded with those styles. Building wall materials, you can see brick was overwhelmingly the most common here. And with some of the new buildings, we encounter vinyl quite a bit, some aluminum, and then some stone in the late 19th, early 20th century. So in summary, we have two areas, the Roberts de Villiers Houses Historic District and the Lockhart Houses Historic Districts, that we're recommending as potentially eligible for National Register or city designation. And we recommend that all of the things here that we earmarked as potentially eligible, that those be surveyed at the intensive level. And what I mean by intensive level is, in this survey, we only looked at the building superficially. We took a photograph, but we think that these merit further research. So actually going into the historic record and finding out the full history of these properties, that will help uncover additional types of significance beyond just the architectural significance. And we recommend that anything that already has been officially determined eligible for listing in the National Register, that the neighborhood pursue formal listing for those things. And this last recommendation, this is, I think, probably one of the most important as far as something that the community really should follow up and initiate some dialogue about, because this is something that is not as well known in the preservation community, and but it's a tool that I think the neighborhood can use should they feel that it's appropriate. So there is a type of property called traditional cultural property, which is something that can be listed in the National Register because of its association with cultural practices or beliefs of a living community that are rooted in the community's history and are important in maintaining the continuing cultural identity of the community. And one thing I want to add about this is, as I mentioned earlier, we also surveyed the other neighborhoods in the Hill District. And I don't think that Crawford-Roberts should be looked at in a vacuum when it comes to its potential for being a traditional cultural property. I think that there should be engagement with all of the Hill District neighborhoods, and they should be comprehensively looked at uh, to see if either a larger area that goes beyond the neighborhood boundaries or several different smaller areas may qualify to be a traditional cultural property. And as you can guess, because the significance of a TCP is rooted in the community's history and cultural identity, it's the community members that have the expertise in identifying a traditional cultural property and need to have that dialogue and have the iterative process of figuring out what's important to them and what they think may meet those uh, the qualifications for listing in the National Register. And so I hope that this study can be used as a tool for that community dialogue and engagement in the future. Um, throughout the Hill District. So I'm going to move on to just show you a little bit of information about those historic districts. These are two representative properties in the Roberts de Villiers Houses Historic District. And the residential section of the Roberts de Villiers redevelopment area should be evaluated for its significance under National Register Criterion A for its association with post-urban renewal development uh, plan, which was intentionally structured to give the Hill District community agency in its own redevelopment. And there's more information in the report about this, but this neighborhood is important because it's one where an African-American developer was involved, and so it was really important to the community from a historic perspective. So this is kind of a detailed plan with the boundary of the recommended district in green and the individual properties here, and all of the ones shown in green or light blue are contributing. Only one is non-contributing, and the non-contributing one, I believe that it's because of the house is not there. And you'll notice we've got this one outlier up here, which is actually it's outside the neighborhood boundary. The neighborhood boundary is in blue, but it was part of the development. So we've also included that in our mapping so it doesn't get chopped off inadvertently. The Lockhart houses, as you can see, this is quite a bit different in time period. This is something from 1889. This potential historic district was previously identified, but was not evaluated. And it consists of 50 houses constructed in 1889 on Dinwiddie Street above Colwell Street. And most of the housing has been replaced with new construction. However, we feel that there is a smaller part that does remain that we think should be recognized for its significance. And you'll see in the map here. So this whole area, even going off the map, is where starting here and going up is where the 50 houses were. But down here in the south end, we feel that this small concentration here of these remaining houses should be recognized as its own historic district. And so that's the end of my formal presentation, but I'd like to allow some time, and I've thrown a lot of information at you. So we have some time for questions from those here who are on the call. I'll be happy to answer what I can, and or try to refer you to other places of information if I can't answer the question.
Hi, this is Britt
Mhm.
Collins with the Collaborative and Consensus Group. The general question, whenever you had mentioned the Robert de Villiers, those homes being recommended for that designation, if that were to happen for those homes, would that put any restriction on the homeowners? Like if they were looking to do any updates or renovations, like would that stifle them from being able to do certain things with that specific designation?
Well, thank you for answering that question. It's a really important question, and I have two answers for you. Regarding listing in the National Register of Historic Places, that does not place any restriction on homeowners, but I'll give a caveat to that. Anytime if federal money is used or state or federal permit is used, and similarly, there's some restrictions with state monies and permits as well, but it's a little bit different process. But with the exception of anything that is federally funded, there are no restrictions on what a property owner can do. However, if a district is listed as a city designated district, that does invoke design review through you would have to get a certificate of appropriateness if a city district is listed for exterior work. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add about that quickly?
No, what's easiest to say is, like, with the National Register, there's no restrictions for private individuals. For the city historic designation, there are reviews to exterior alterations that are visible from a public right of way. That doesn't necessarily say you can't do what you want to do. It just needs to be done in a certain way. And in an area where there's so much development potentially going on, you kind of potentially need a little bit more control over the demolitions in your area. Potentially, you need to sort of help to maintain the character of your neighborhood. A local designation can be a really good tool. So that's just my 2 cents, but
No, because I definitely do agree from that
Mhm.
demolition standpoint. The
Mhm.
only concern or challenge I would think is just from the perspective of an actual homeowner, not
Yeah.
necessarily understanding the permitting process and the review process, and perhaps, decide that they want to get a certain
Mhm.
roof that might not align with, I guess, whatever the historic designation might declare or
Mhm.
require it to be. So I see it on both sides where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you do want to have certain controls because you don't just
Mhm.
want whatever existed to just be,
Mhm.
wiped away,
Yeah. Well,
but at the same time, yeah,
after this, I'm sorry. After this, we're going to talk about historic design guidelines for Shenley
gotcha.
Farms. And so the guidelines are one of the ways that we can sort of mitigate that for the homeowners, is they get to decide what's important to them and sort of fit that into the process that we have in place. Like, for example, one of the rules would be, if you're going to replace your windows, make sure your windows fit in the hole that you took the window out of. You know what I mean? No filler, and then put the
Yes,
window in. It's gotta
gotcha.
all be the same size. So just
Yes,
stuff like that is kind of easy to do, but it makes such a big difference in the way the neighborhood looks. You know,
yeah. Hmm.
so it's those kind of things, and it's, you know, we're working on guidelines for 3 districts that we've never had them for. So, we recognize the need for that, and for, to help the property owners understand what they need. And I'm hijacking Jesse's presentation. So I'm gonna
No,
turn it back over to Jesse.
actually, Sarah, this is a really a good I think, a very good opportunity to highlight how the guidelines for historic districts
Mhm,
can be tailored to
mhm,
the properties. For instance, here we've got houses, the 1970s houses are going to have very different design guidelines from the
mhm,
1889 houses. And
mhm,
so I think by necessity, they have to be tailored. And I think we don't have any districts from the 1970s in the city yet. So, I think the way that if this were to be listed, it would be something very new, that the
mhm,
guidelines, we follow the same principles, but I think they would be interpreted in new ways because the materiality of the buildings is quite different with frame split level houses versus the stone houses that you have in
mhm.
Lockhart neighborhood. So
Well, and another example would be slate roofs. I don't know how many slate roofs there are in this part of the city, but you know, they only last, and I say only, they last about 100 years um, for various reasons. So a lot of them are breaking down. I don't want to say falling apart, but they're kind of falling apart. So it's a general rule that the commissioners will allow folks to put dark gray architectural shingles, asphalt shingles on their houses in place of the asphalt roofs or in place of the um, slate roofs because nobody can afford those anymore. So there's a lot of practicality involved in it too. It's just kind of you have to think through the right way to do things. And that's really what the guidelines are about. So, you know, anyways. Anything else, Jesse?
any other questions on other parts of the presentation?
Hearing none. Thank you, Jesse,
No,
for your presentation.
you're welcome. One last thing, the presentation itself, the posting location for the community. That's not in my last slide. I wanted to make sure that it was clear that everyone, if they haven't received it already, that they know how to find it and how to share it.
Sure, all of the RCOs will receive your presentation as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Jesse. And then I will pass it back over to Sarah for her presentation.
Okay. If you could unshare, that would be fantastic.
Okay.